Okay, you guys, what I am doing is I'm using DU Recorder. It's a really nice app to record this video that I'm doing. I'm actually doing it on my phone. I'm not doing it with my software or anything on my computer. So this chart here, I'm going to expand for you. And basically what this chart is this is the Hatsan 135 and 177 cal. And what I did is I cronied some pellets for you guys so I can show you the speed of the pellet, but also I want to talk to you about what type of pellets you should use in the Hatsan 135 to get peak performance. So if you look here, I'm going to zoom it in and I'm going to drag this picture over a little bit later on here. If you look at the top there, it says 15, 10.34, 9.57, 8.8. That's the grain weight of the pellet. And then if you look at the left column going vertical, up and down, you'll see that it says 0, 300, 600, 900, 1200, 1500. That's the velocity. So you got the grain weight on the top and then the velocity on the left panel. So as you can see, a 15 grain, which you can use out of this rifle because it's powerful enough to handle it. I would not shoot 15 grain pellets in the weaker springers. You don't want a pellet getting stuck, and you don't want to have too much pressure on that piston that's pushing the air in your cylinder. So I would stop with the Hatsan 135 at a 15 grain pellet, and that's just my opinion. And then if you look over 10.34, that's the JSB round nose. That's doing 975. That's still pretty darn good. Almost going 1,000 feet per second for a 10.34 grain pellet. That's really booking for a heavy pellet. And then the 9.57, we got 1,004. And then the 8.8 grain, that's I think that was a hollow point one, a Cro-Magnon, that pellet. Oh, by the way, the 9.57 was the Phoenix coal pellet. Them are $8 for 500. I found that they're better than Crossman and Gamble round point pellets. And then we go over here to the 7 grain. That was an RWS Hobby, I think I shot at 1344. And then the 5.56 was an alloy. It was a Field Target Trophy by H&N, 5.56. And by the way, for a very light pellet, it does have somewhat of a okay ballistic coefficient, even though it's lightweight. So it's a super lightweight pellet, and it has somewhat of a decent ballistic coefficient. I was getting 0.016 out of it or something like that, anywhere from 0.013 to 0.016. So it's a little bit better than a wad cutter next to it, 7 grain, which is 0.010 for ballistic coefficient. And then your medium round nose pellets, ballistic coefficient would be somewhere around 0.020 and maybe a little bit more. And then your long round nose pellets like that 10.34 grain right there, you're looking at 0.025, even higher, maybe even up into the 30s for some of them pellets. So the ballistic coefficient is important because the better the ballistic coefficient is, it means that whatever velocity you start with, it doesn't lose as much velocity at longer ranges as the other pellets do. Like for instance, you got the 7 grain wad cutter starting out at 1300, and if you look next to it, you've got the 9.57, which is kind of like a round nose pellet there, 2 over, doing 1,000 feet per second. Now somebody would think that at 100 yards, the 7 grain wad cutter would get there first, but not so, because it has a poor ballistic coefficient. It's 0.010, so it doesn't travel through the air as efficiently as the 9.57 grain pellet would. So the 9.57 round nose pellet would get to the target faster than the wad cutter would. And that's generally true, unless you're talking close range. Of course, yeah, the 5.56 and the 7 grain that's shown there with high velocity will get to the target quicker. But as you go out further and further, the heavy ones, the slow ones here, they catch up because they have a high ballistic coefficient. So that's something to consider. And when you're picking pellets out for the Hatsan 135, I wouldn't go any heavier than 15 because you can see it's 756 there. And I would stay away from the Mach speed pellets. And my elevation in Minnesota, our Mach speed rating would be about 1125. So I try to keep my pellets right around 8.8 grains, as you see there, or heavier, for the simple reason that I don't want that Mach speed, and then at further yardage, I don't want that Mach speed to fall subsonic, and that's what happens. It's kind of like if you guys have a boat or something and you're coming into a dock, you know how you shut off your engine, and then a few seconds later your own waves kick you from behind in the back of the boat. Well, that's kind of like subsonic waves catching up to the back of the pellet after it's gone Mach speed. So whenever a pellet is going Mach speed and it changes, say within 25, 50 yards down to subsonic, you get some turbulence and some trouble in the back end of that skirt, and you can have accuracy problems. So it's always good to keep your pellets below Mach speed if you can. And Mach speed is determined also on your altitude and your barometric pressure and all kinds of factors too. So you want to find out what your Mach speed is, and usually you can tell when you're doing crony testing and you hear that big cracking sound. That's busting the sound barrier. And indoors here, I found that 1100 won't do it, but right around 1125, I hear that big wallop. And then I know that 1125 is busting the sound barrier. So if you guys get this rifle, the other thing you have to remember about the Hatsan 135 is very, very powerful. You don't typically want to use these really lightweight ones too often, like the 7 grain and the 7.56. And the reason for that is that piston, it's slamming the breech really hard. Pushing that pellet out, because it doesn't take much to get these pellets out of the barrel. So what I try to do is I try not to use too heavy of a pellet, but not too light. So I stick right around the 9.5 grain, like you see there, 1,004 feet per second. That would be fine, or even a 10 grain, 15 grain once in a while. But heavy pellets, you want to make sure you don't go too heavy. Because when that piston comes forward and it has nowhere to push that air, some of the air could get around the piston over time and blow out your piston, so the rubber part that's on the end of your piston. So both things can be bad for long term for the piston inside the cylinder, and that is shooting too many lightweight pellets and shooting too many heavies. Although I think this 15 grain for this rifle is fine, because you can see it's still got a pretty good velocity there, 756 for that heavy pellet. So, but I wouldn't push it too much further for weight than that. I wouldn't shoot the 21 grain pile driver in the Hatsan 135, even though you could get 600 feet per second out of it or something like that. But I think that might be just a little bit too tight for a Springer. So. But anyway, thank you much, you guys, for watching the video.